Better roads drive better jobs. That's Governor Rick Snyder's message as he pushes to restore what he says is a deteriorating infrastructure. But how will the state finance a massive fix that includes roads, bridges, broadband, and water and sewer systems? Oh, and let's not forget about the bridge project. We'll discuss it all on West Michigan Week. And thank you for joining us on West Michigan Week. On the panel, Carol Valade, Grand Rapids Business Journal. Good to see you. And Jim Harger from the Grand Rapids Press.
Hello.
And our old friend, wearing a new hat, Jeff Cranston, now the Director of Communications with the Michigan Department of Transportation. You're going to explain all of this, and you have a half an hour to do it.
12-page message, 1/2 hour. Okay.
Well, the theme of the message, though, is that the state's behind the times. We need to fix the infrastructure if we want to bring in keep the businesses we have and entertain new business prospects. Is that pretty much it?
Absolutely. The big theme is that we have to rebuild the backbone first, the foundation, or think of it like Maslow. Our foundation has to be this solid before we move to the next level, and if we want to reinvent the state, as the governor talks about, it means reinventing our infrastructure and reinvesting in it. And it's encouraging to hear, business leaders like the Chamber of Commerce and people at the right place talk about how infrastructure is economic development, that the two go hand in hand. So yeah, that was the theme. It is about jobs and it's about the economy.
I mean, getting rid of the Michigan business tax and changing the tax code to the 6% flat tax was a start. But when you look at the list that companies look at, or at least what they say they'd like to see, infrastructure is right up at the top of that list.
It is, absolutely is. It gets more dicey when you ask them how they want to pay for it, but everybody agrees that we need it to be better. And it's very consistent with the MBT message and the simplifying the tax code. The governor used these charts that he really liked, showing the Byzantine 60-year-old Public Act 51, which is our formula now for roads. It's just a coincidence that it actually passed in 1951, but it makes the message come through loud and clear. It's 60 years old, and that's still how we do our formula. So we need to rethink that. And it was on 2 boards and just a morass, this Byzantine morass of things. And then the proposal would just simplify that. It can be done on 1 page, and the governor's big on that. Get it down to something people can understand. Make it simple.
Oh, from what I'm hearing back from the business community especially is that it's a little bit of a shell game. If you're removing the state tax on fuel and diesel and moving it to the wholesale level, it comes back at you eventually in retail anyway. And then there's the addition of $10 a month for vehicle registration.
No, he didn't actually call for that, though. Did you hear him call for
that
increase?
Was
he said, for example, this is something you could do, the registration. Now, as far as the shell game goes, I understand why they're saying that, and it's true that the wholesalers could indeed pass that back on. We don't know if they'll pass it all on.
But it's more market-driven, which is in sync with Snyder's thinking.
Exactly, exactly. There's 2 things. One, gas tax revenues are shrinking. I think you have a graphic that shows that.
We do.
They continue to decline. We drive less, we drive more fuel-efficient cars. So to keep that at 19 cents, 19 cents will always be 19 cents, actually 18.71, but that'll always be the same. No matter what gas is, you get the same amount of money. It doesn't adjust for inflation. If you do a wholesale tax, if the price of gas goes up, you get a little more, but he would put a cap on it. There would be a floor and a ceiling, so it couldn't go too low, but it also couldn't go too high, so we wouldn't bring in too much revenue. But when we say revenue neutral, we mean what we get now will at least continue to get. Now we're going backwards. So that's why I don't buy the shell game analogy, because I don't think anybody was touting this as, hey, we're going to save you money by doing this. We're just saying that we need at least as much money going forward. Does that make sense?
Well, it sounds like what they do in Wisconsin, isn't it?
Wisconsin uses a bit of a wholesale, yeah. They didn't completely throw out their gas tax, though. They have a pretty high gas tax, actually.
But if you change it to a percentage and gas goes up to $5 a gallon, you're going to get 20% more than you're getting now.
That's why you have a floor and a ceiling. You roll back the percentage.
You would roll back the percentage.
Yeah, it wouldn't be fixed.
Now, how does that...
6.7 is what it would take right now on current prices with wholesale. 6.7% would get us the same roughly $900 million that we get from the current gas tax. And it would make sure that we always get at least that much.
When do you put the ceiling in place, or where do you put the ceiling to prevent the you're from getting more than
building up a huge surplus?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I can only imagine what that would be like. That would be up to the legislature.
Where does this fit in with the suggestion he had on a $10 per month, $120 per year registration, or additional registration fee on a vehicle. For a family with 2 cars, that's $240 a year. That's a hard sell politically. Where does that fit in with the change in the gas tax?
That's introduced as a way of saying, I want to do this to keep us even in terms of the revenue we have now. If you've read Representative Olson, conservative Republican, fiscal conservative, who was very skeptical going into this and dove into this in a way that no legislator ever has. I mean, he put his full Stanford mind behind this thing. He's a Saline Republican and spent months researching it and studying it, and came out, and Roy Schmidt was his Democratic counterpart, and came out with the same conclusions that the Transportation Funding Task Force, known as TF2, came out with a few years ago. We need about $1.4 billion to maintain and get to the fixes that we need going forward to get our bridges back up to speed, get our state highways. We're just talking about, the trunk lines.
What are the projections going forward? You're saying 1.4 now. What are we looking at 5-10 years down the road if these fixes aren't made now?
Oh, well, the common figure there is for every dollar you would spend now, you're saving off $8 to $14 in maintenance later. That's a real pay me now, pay me later, which only makes sense. I mean, we've done in Michigan a really good job the last 10 years of just what they call managing our assets, pavement preservation, doing the things on the surface to keep it so the highway doesn't crumble and become to the state that it needs a complete rebuild. But we're hanging by a thread now. We've kind of glossed it over. It's kind of like putting a coat of paint on your house and underneath the wood is rotting. We're at the point where a lot of these roads, I mean, when people talk about it, one of the dilemmas I think we face is that most of us, we drive on the interstates, around Grand Rapids, US 131, with 196 being rebuilt and most of 96, it's pretty good shape. When you talk about potholes and streets that are bad, it's the city streets, the local streets that they have a hard time coming up with the funding to fix. People confuse those two. Most people don't know the difference between state trunk lines.
And that brings up the local option he talked about too, as well as the option of having the local registration fee. I would imagine that a city like Grand Rapids would have a tough time imposing such a local registration fee as long as the specter of $120 per vehicle state registration fee is looming.
Maybe, but that one thing.
Because then if you go up to 40, then you're talking 160 per vehicle. Is this just a menu of choices that the governor's given us, or is he proposing that we do all of this to get to where we want to be?
He's saying that these are the practical things that we could do. And again, he's not pushing it. He wants to start the conversation. He emphasized several times yesterday in his presentation. I mean, you can read the message online, the 12-page message, but he just gave kind of the high points. He goes off the cuff, as you know. But he said several times in his own remarks, I just want to start the conversation. I want to get the problem out there, as Representative Olson's report did, and then have people talk about what they would do. For the most part, we've decided in Michigan we don't want to be a toll state. Maybe without population growth, maybe tolling wouldn't work right now. We don't want to be a vehicle miles traveled state like Oregon and Iowa and Minnesota. States have experimented with that. There's a feeling here. We don't want devices in our car. We don't want anybody tracking us, telling us what else do they know about us besides how many miles we drive. So if you take those things off the table, there's only so many things you can do. Your choices are pretty limited. And registration is one of those things to look at. The local option would be a vote of the people. And road millages, township road millages, often do pretty well when you take it down to that very micro local level.
And
people say, I understand
the local control.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions in regard to the local vehicle and actually the vehicle fees. As we evolve to electric cars, the registration fees seem like the game way to go, because it doesn't matter whether you're doing fuel or electric or whatever type of vehicle.
Exactly.
And so are there projections for that evolution? And then does this sort of cement that future of funding in a way that nothing else could?
There are projections, but they're like everything, they're argued about, because some people think that we're going to go that direction much more quickly than we are. It's a matter of is it an environmental thing? Is it an economic thing that's going to drive us to that? Nobody can say for sure how fast we'll go to all electric or how fast we'll go to more hybrids.
It's all about pricing.
But the one, yeah, exactly. It's all about pricing too. One point though that is lost on a lot of people, because I hear this all the time, and they say, well, geez, if I drive an electric car or or a hybrid like a Prius, it weighs considerably less than say a Hummer. So should I be charged the same to drive on the roads? Well, yeah, it's just as hard on the road. Until you get to a gravel truck or to a heavy commercial vehicle, your little car, your Mazda 3 is as hard on the roads as a Hummer, believe it or not, in terms of the wear and tear and what it does.
That's based on vehicle sale price now, isn't it?
Yep, registration is, yeah. But my point is that they think I'm not as hard on the road.
Right.
Why should I have to pay as much? And it's like, turns out you are just as hard on the road no matter what you're driving. So in that sense, it is fair, because you're not paying fuel taxes because you're driving a fuel-efficient vehicle, but you're still using the road.
So I guess my point in coming back to this is the supposition that instead of having the fuel taxes, we'll have the registration taxes, which could forever be increased to continue to maintain and repair roads. I mean, it's a better way of looking at it systemically for the long term in these fees.
That's the governor's thinking.
And if the local roads need to be fixed, the local governments would have to raise the revenue by vote of the population.
It gives them an option to do that, and they can decide how they want to ante that up, too.
So
it
is
can
there
go to
some
transit, it can go to
a complete
light
division,
rail.
state funding then for state trunk lines, bridges, and not so much on the local level? There'll be a bigger division between them?
There would be. They would still get some money back, from the state transportation funds. But yeah,
so the onus is going to be on local governments to raise that revenue for upkeep and repair of local
absolutely,
roads.
but there's other incentives in there too for local governments to do other things, to consolidate agencies, county road commissions. Kent County, Ottawa County, very efficient. Some county road commissions aren't as efficient, and they're not as accountable. They don't. They're perhaps elected for life, and much like the judicial system, where people might not know who they're voting for.
There was a stipulation with road commissions that were funded with under 70, was it 70,000 a year, 50,000 a year?
50,000.
And I'm wondering whether there's anything like that in this region, in the West Michigan region.
Oh, there would be some communities,
some
cities and villages, yeah, that would be in that under $50,000 a year, and they would be,
automatically consolidated.
Yeah, that's very consistent with what the governor proposed in terms of revenue sharing, providing incentives to get your revenue sharing, that you're merging services, you're making efforts to cooperate with other communities and share administrative costs where you can, getting colleges and universities to lower tuition, providing incentives to do that. If you set your tuition down, you'll get this much back in state aid. It's all that kind of thing. It's all incentivizing. It's the carrot approach.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, more with MDOT Communication Director Jeff Cranston. And we're back with Jeff Cranston, who is the new Communication Director with Michigan Department of Transportation. The governor has a big vision here. I mean, he's talking about a Montreal, Michigan, Midwest corridor of commerce, essentially. And that would include the Great Lakes, and talk of finishing up a project that I believe dates back to, 1986. There's been funding to add or repair some of the locks up in Sault Ste. Marie. Is that part of this big vision that he has?
Yeah, absolutely. Expanding, repairing, even replacing the Sioux locks, that's all part of it. I mean, that's important to commerce too. That's an important passageway. Ports were part of this. On the priority list, not as high probably, but yeah, definitely. It's all part of the vision. I think you framed it well. You said it's all part of a grander vision for how Michigan fits in to the Great Lakes and, you know, northern North America.
What does he see? I mean, you've met with them. We call him the nerd and everything, but
big picture.
But yeah, I mean, where he has this big picture. What does he ultimately want to see out of this state?
He wants to see the way paved. He wants his job to be to create the infrastructure, the mechanisms to move commerce and traffic freely, do whatever he can to accommodate business needs. Mining is coming back in some ways in the UP. That means that you've got to have a way to ship your goods. So that's where the Sulaks.
Don't you find this a little bit interesting, Jeff? The motor state, you know, the state responsible for the big three domestic
put the world
car
on
makers,
wheels.
and deliberately kind of created a transportation system that required those wheels. And now we're looking at a completely different psychology in terms of public transportation and some of these new initiatives that would pull that federal funding.
That's why it's been.
Can you get the psyche changed?
I don't know. That's why it's historically been such a hard sell. You know, when M&M rolled out that Super Bowl commercial, any of us that grew up in Michigan felt tremendous pride in that. You know, even if you're on the west side.
That was Kevin Yan, I think, in
well,
Grand Rapids. I'm
yeah,
kidding, but anyway.
He did the voice.
Right.
Yeah. But that commercial, you know, that this is how I roll, this is what we do. I think even if you're on the west side of the state and, you know, have long since abandoned Detroit, there was that sense of this is about us, this is about Michigan, this is what we do. So you're right. How do you reconcile that with a need to think about other means of transport and complete streets and more walkable communities and bicycling and buses and rail and all those things?
How much interest is there on the local or county levels to really provide those public transit plans?
Well, in Kent County, I think there's tremendous interest. They passed a, you know,
Detroit, especially the population area, the Ann Arbor, Detroit.
Well, did you look at
that
that Southeast Transit agreement and what it would mean? Those 4 counties, yeah, Macomb, Oakland, Wayne, and Washtenaw, tying Washtenaw in, and coming up with the, you know, those rolling buses and dedicated lanes, and they can change the lights, you know, so that they can do rapid rolling buses. You know, that works tremendously in Denver. And you're right, though, it's a tremendous change in mindset for Southeast Michigan to think about doing that. In some ways, West Michigan is probably ahead on that front in terms of funding it and seeing it as an engine of growth into the economy. I mean, that's why the business leaders here, why the Myers of the world and why Wynn Irwin and why Cascade Engineering and so many important businesses support the rapid millage, because it's important to their business and they get that.
How do you affect those agreements between governmental units, especially in that heavily populated corridor in Southeast, Ann Arbor, Detroit? Or does the suggestion that Mayor Bing and Governor Snyder work together with the federal transportation heads circumvent all of that necessity?
Well, I think Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood's, you know, visits and his emphasis on that helps a lot. But I also think that I've been surprised myself. I would have thought, you know, being West Michigan centric for so many years, that Macomb County, for instance, wouldn't have been as supportive as it turns out they have been of their SMART system, of their bus system. So there's every reason to believe Macomb and Wayne and Oakland and Washtenaw County, you know, all about, you know, different kinds of transit, modes of transit. So I think, I'm confident that they're going to be able to get it together and make that happen and come up with a regional, you know, transit authority.
Does that leave West Michigan out?
Well, no, I think we're ahead of them in many ways. We've got 6 communities, and that'll be interesting to see if they structure it so it's you know, majority vote wins. In other words, let's say they have a vote on some kind of, you know, millage, some kind of tax. Say they do the $40 option to fund that, with a great deal going toward that transit authority, and Oakland County votes no. Do the votes in Macomb and Wayne and Washtenaw carry the day, much as we do with our 6 communities now in the rapid vote? If it's structured that way in the legislation, I think they've got a real chance of passing it.
Sounds like a premonition or prediction.
Well, because I don't know then, if they didn't vote for it in one county, then do they opt out? I mean, as you know, there are cities here that would like to opt out of the rapid already. So,
what are we going to see from the governor going forward on this? I mean, he's laid it out, he's started the conversation. The conclusion everybody draws at the outset is, this is going to cost me a lot of money, this is going to cost us a lot of money. And these are hard times, as Representative Agema said, and he suggested, let's look at the state sales tax. But how do you keep how is Governor Snyder going to keep this conversation going when the end result is, this is going to cost me? And who likes to talk about that?
Yeah, that's the key question. And if you buy the premise in the first place that we need to invest in infrastructure, then it's only a matter of how. And that's why I put the question back to the naysayers. What would you do? What if not this, then what? That's what the conversation is. What are you proposing? You're right, Representative Agema and a couple of others have looked at various things. Senator Walker from Traverse City wants to add a percentage to the sales tax. Some people still talk about expanding the sales tax to services, and maybe you take those funds that come from services, put that into education, take the sales tax on fuel now, and put that into roads, because most people think that anyway. If they know at all that they're paying 6% sales tax on top of their other fuel taxes, they probably think that goes to roads. Well, it doesn't. It largely goes to education. So Representative Agema has that idea. Let's take that sales tax, put it into roads, and obviously he's big on aviation and buttressing airports too. But then what do you do about education? There's no simple answer there. I think we have to think about that. Why did we come up with a system a long time ago that pitted roads against schools? That's scary policy.
The broadband system proposed and assuring access all the way through the UP and in rural areas could be costly as a state project too, rolled into infrastructure. Would these proposals for extra funding pay for that in addition to all this road and bridge work?
That was never mentioned as part of that.
Okay.
Like that $40 local option, transit certainly. Broadband wasn't really a Department of Transportation thing, but
I'm not
I think
sure what
that's
he's
an interesting idea.
That's
That's an interesting idea to say, communication tied to transportation. Can we pass this at the same time and fund it? He definitely wanted to put an emphasis on that. And if you read the white paper that goes with the message and the need for broadband and rural development, I mean, we need to do everything we can. Agriculture is still one of the top industries in Michigan. It's doing very well.
Well, economic development heads have always said that's a big part of the
Absolutely.
Infrastructure and economic development piece.
And providing better broadband to the UP by using fiber optic cable that had already been put in place across the bridge is a wonderful thing. That's a great use of existing resources and existing infrastructure. It's one more way that the Mackinac Bridge is linking the two peninsulas.
Speaking of bridges, there's another bridge
dear.
project. I said we'd bring it up. We have to. What happened there? Is this a case where the anti-bridge commercials that were out there, did they work? Were there enough constituents out there who picked up the phone and called and said, hey, I don't want you voting yes for this? Because it seems like a win-win. And it seemed like the Senate was looking at it that way. What happened there?
Yeah, I think people came together and decided that they don't like this now as structured, and maybe some people never will like it. Maybe they'll never think that that the government should build another bridge. But I have to stick with the governor on this and his relentless positive action and his belief that it's still going to happen and that we're going to have it one way or another, because it's too important to our economy not to do it. It's very important to West Michigan. 1 in 7 jobs are tied to commerce there. Again, the asparagus crop that is so valuable in West Michigan has a tremendous market in Canada. It needs to go across that bridge. So in terms of what happened there with last week's vote, I think that that was unfortunate, but I think that this will come around again one way or another, and I think that the proponents and my department is out of it. We're have been on hold now for several months. The governor's office is talking about it and still trying to make it happen. But I think that you'll still have to have an honest conversation. I think there's still a lot of confusion out there about what it is. But the one thing that you can't deny is that the Canadians are willing to put up $550 million that matches $2.2 billion in federal money that we can use for other roads and bridges. And that's just too much to leave on the table.
Does that become the linchpin for everything else? If you can get that, the Canadians to finance, get the federal matching dollars, it makes it a lot easier, and maybe in lieu of taxes, or that would reduce some of the fees. Do the dominoes then fall in place as far as funding the big picture?
I guess so. I think that mainly, the Lieutenant Governor gives a great answer on this when he says this is all predicated on Michigan, returning to prosperity, that we recover jobs. And I think, what we've done by taking the accelerated rail funds to pump up that corridor between Detroit and Chicago, which is a wonderful thing. Again, important to business. Ford Jiffy Mix, all those companies, the same companies along that corridor, the same companies in West Michigan want that better egress to Canada. They want faster times, they want bigger plazas so that they can roll through customs, get the inspections that they need, and keep on going on to what will be a new 4-lane road.
Automakers,
all of those.
not just ag. There isn't a trucking company, I think, that we've ever interviewed that didn't have some real issues with the way
tremendous
that
support. So answering that question, Patrick, when the Lieutenant Governor says, if you don't believe that Michigan's coming back anyway, then we might as well all leave now. So it's all predicated on future growth. So it's a very pessimistic view to say, well, I just don't think those projections are right because I think, we're going to continue to shrink forever. Well, I don't buy that, and I hope nobody else does either.
So who in the legislature picks up the football and runs with it? We'll have to wait and see. Carol Valade, Grand Rapids Business Journal, thank you for joining us. Jim Harger, Grand Rapids Press. And MDOT's Communication Director, Jeff Cranston. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us this week. We'll see you next week on West Michigan Week.